Well, welcome to class 107, and this is going to focus on the ontology of the manifestations. It's something we talk about it all along, because the nature of the manifestations is really at the heart of all of the Baha'i teachings about the revelation of God's plan for humankind. And I have a book that I have written that focuses in great detail on the nature, the powers, and plans of the manifestations, called The Face of God, which I'll show you the cover of that in a minute. So let's get started with my sharing my screen, and then going on to move these out of the way. All right. So the ontology of the manifestations, and the word ontology, as I've mentioned before, simply means the nature of the being, the essential reality. So the ontology of the human being is begins with the emanation of the soul from the realm of the spirit and its association with the body, so long as we're in this world. And then once the body is no longer capable of associating with the soul and all of its powers, such as cognition and memory and so on, continue in the realm of the spirit, where it's really been all along. So the book I was mentioning is this book, The Face of God Among Us, How the Creator Educates Humanity. And it's very well organized, if nothing else. But it goes into great detail. And of course, all of it's based on the writings, the authoritative writings about the manifestations and their capacities and so on, which we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I doubt that we'll get through with this program tonight, simply because there are about 50 slides. And so we'll continue it into next time. But before we do, I wanted to show you something that we're going to be discussing either next week or the week after, where we're going to get into a rather exciting area. Of course, what could be more exciting than the manifestations of God, other than creation itself? Well, what we're going to be getting at after we finish discussing the nature of the manifestations of God is a theory I have, and it's admittedly not authoritative. But last time we were talking about the arcs of ascent that descend from the inspiration of God to the manifestations via the Holy Spirit, and then they create, through their will and determination, the arc of descent, which is, again, not a negative thing. It's not descent in the sense of a negative descent, but a descent from the mind of God to the creation of the various worlds of God. So every planet that is inhabited by life is like, as Abdu'l-Baha, a seed in the matrix of the universe. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? So the planet, of course, spins off from the sun as a hot, molting ball of stuff, and eventually it will, if it's in the what's called the Cinderella position, which means not too close to the star or the sun and not too far away from it, it will evolve human life, if God deems it worthy of being elevated to that state via the manifestations. And then you have the arc of ascent, where once human life comes into being, through the both individually and collectively, the human life is elevated through the various stages of searching, of love, knowledge, unity, so on, that you have in the same kind of arc in the seven valleys, where, as I say, we experience that individually, but as we experience it as a society as well. Then you have another way of looking at this, and these are both they're similar in a sense, but whereas this is not really talking about this, in a way implies a period of time where this happens, obviously, because the earth cools down and these things evolve and come into being. And another way of looking at each dispensation has an arc of ascent and descent. Now, this is a parabolic image that I've used, so that in the darkest time of the previous revelation, once it is no longer effective, you have the dawning of the new revelation, its ascent, its effulgence, and then its ultimate decline. Though we're told that we will not have another nighttime, but we will have another need for another revelation, because there's always more that we will be able to learn and accomplish. And so if you look at it over time, you do see this ascent so that all the religions so far have gone into some kind of decline. The Baha'i faith didn't decline per se, other than the fact that it was never able to be implemented, nor, as the Guardian says, was it intended to be fully implemented. It was a preparation for, so I mean, this is really one revelation. So this isn't really accurate here. But what I'm getting together, what I'm trying to get at is this thesis I have for your homework for next time. And this is a thesis by me. It is not authoritative. And I'm titling it A Process of Chronology versus a Process of Causality in the Structure of Reality. And my theory is that there is no process of chronology in the totality of creation, but really just a process of causality. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I tried to state it here. I just dashed this off, so it may not be the most articulate way of expressing the idea, but we'll get into it. We are examining, that is, all of us in this course and all of us on the planet Earth, and studying a system or structure, subsystems of which are in the process of becoming arcs of descent and ascent, but the totality of which is impervious to time, to descent or ascent. That is, the universe has always been as it is, a complete and perfect system, because the wish of God to be known has no point of beginning in time, but only a point of beginning in the sequence of causality. So as we said last time, God didn't suddenly think of, gee, I would like to be known. God has always existed, and God has always had that quality of wanting to be known. Therefore, existence has always been. Therefore, the perfect fulfillment of that wish has always existed. So in other words, inasmuch as God has always wished it, then the resulting system to fulfill that wish must always have existed as well. It's not in the process of becoming, even though parts of it are. A completed perfect design. Furthermore, even though the system itself is in a constant state of change as subsystems come into being and go out of being, such as planets, we know this planet will go out of being in about 4.5 billion years. Much as cells in the body give life to the body, then cease, while the body continues. In this sense, the universe might be compared to an eternally existing body that will never cease to exist. And in fact, we will come across, when we study this, a quote from Abdu'l-Baha where he compares the universe to a body in another context. Now, here's some critical questions that we derive from looking at the ontological circle. Of course, there are lots of them, and we could talk about it a long time. But these are some of the ones that we're going to deal with. Why does God feel the need to create anything in the first place? Why are the manifestations created before heaven and earth? This is stated in the writings. We're going to see a passage that says this. So the manifestations are created before the heaven and earth themselves. Now, that doesn't mean all of physical reality, we can presume, but just, though I don't know, that's what it says. Why does God feel two dimensions are necessary? Why not just create the spiritual dimension? Why is there a need for a physical dimension? Well, we've talked about that a little before. We'll talk about it some more. Why doesn't God create us the way he wants us to be in the first place? If he wants us to be spiritual and to be in love with him and to share a love relationship, why didn't he just create us with that in that state? We've dealt with that before. We'll deal with it again. Why does the physical dimension conceal its purpose? Why is physical reality distracting? And so it's a challenge for us to discover the spiritual nature of physical reality, particularly in our own lives, in our own family lives. Are there other planets capable of sustaining human life? This, of course, is what a lot of scientists are speculating about. The Baha'i writings make it pretty clear. If so, do they have their own manifestations? So is Baha'u'llah a manifestation for all of the universe or just for planet Earth? How big is the universe according to the Baha'i scriptures? Does it have limitations? Most scientists, or I don't know what percentage, because they change from day to day what their opinions are. But the Baha'i writings are very clear about what seems to be the answer according to Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. But scientists, some say that there's a sequence of universes. It expands and then contracts and then expands and contracts. Some say that this universe we can observe may be one of several universes, and so on. So that's a question we'll deal with. How many planets are capable of sustaining human life? How many planets capable of sustaining human life are there? Does the universe have a systematic structure, or is it just a whole mass, some of which has structure, some of which does not? As we look again at through the James Webb Telescope, and we see these beautiful spirals and colorful arrangements, some of which seem to have order, some of which seem to be just beginning, some going out of order, and as much as they are hundreds or millions or light years away, we don't know whether we're seeing the past and not the present. If it does, that is, if it has a systematic structure, what part does our planet play in that structure? Is it its own? Are we the only planet in this solar system that has life now or has ever had life? Of course, that's one thing we're trying to discover on Mars, on our examination of Mars. Can we find evidence of a previous existence of intelligent life? Does the universe as a whole have any final objective? Is there some, in other words, we know that the final objective of a planetary structure is to emulate the spiritual world, the kingdom of God come on earth. And so we know it does, it's not ever final in the sense we've got it done as completely as it can be done, because it will, if it was complete and final, it would be effectively the spiritual world, but it can only emulate it a little at a time. Can there be more than one universe, multiverses, as some scientists and others have called it? If God's creation is perfect, how does evil appear? Now, this is something we talked about in the earlier classes, a couple of them, but it's well worth dealing with again. So those are some of the questions we will deal with, not in that precise order. Well, let's begin with the beginning. That God is essentially unknowable, and of course the reality of the manifestations are essentially unknowable. Even our own soul, Baha'u'llah says, is beyond our complete understanding, our description. From time immemorial, he hath been veiled in the ineffable sanctity of his exalted self, talking about God, and will everlastingly continue to be wrapped in the impenetrable mystery of his knowable, unknowable essence. Every attempt to attain an understanding of his inaccessible reality hath ended in complete bewilderment, and every effort to approach his exalted self and envisage his essence hath resulted in hopelessness, and failure. Therefore, God sends us beings that portray for us in human form the reality of God. This is from a letter the Guardian wrote in his messages to, contained in the collection of letters to Alaska called High Endeavors. To answer your question, to answer you briefly, what the original state of the universe was, no one as yet knows. But we believe God is a spiritual being and did create it. How? We do not know. We will have experience of God. So that's really a separate thing that I want us to pay attention to later. We will have experience of God's Spirit through his prophets in the next world. But God is too great for us to know without this intermediary. The prophets know God, but how is more than human minds can grasp. We believe we attained in the next world to seeing the prophets. So that's comforting, isn't it? There is certainly a future life. Heaven and hell are conditions within our own being. So he's saying really about three different things that are important. We have no exact knowledge of how the universe begins, how it comes into creation, that the only way we know God is through the prophets, even in the next life, and that heaven and hell are interior or internal conditions of our spirits and not actual places. So what does, and this is a very critical question. What do we mean by a personal God? Because many religions and even many Baha'i talks I've heard portray God as sort of a collection of the universal powers that exist in the world, that God's not really a being that has a consciousness and is aware of us individually, that this is just a way of, that you would teach children that God loves you, God knows you, God cares for you. But the Guardian, Shoghi Effendi, says this is what is meant by the term personal God. What is meant by personal God is a God who is conscious of his creation, who has a mind, a will, a purpose, and not, as many scientists and materialists believe, an unconscious and determined force operating in the universe. Such conception of the divine being as the supreme and ever-present reality in the world is not anthropomorphic. Now, anthropomorphic means a God fashioned after our based on human limitations. For it transcends all human limitations and forms, and does not and does by no means attempt to define the essence of divinity, which is obviously beyond any human comprehension. To say that God is a personal reality does not mean that he has a physical form or does in any way resemble a human being. To entertain such a belief would be sheer blasphemy. So what does it mean to say we're made in the image of God? Well, it's pretty clear up here at the top that God, like us, has a mind, a will, and a purpose, as do we. So we are given these same qualities. and we have an essential spiritual reality, even as does God. So here again, God is known solely through his prophets. God in his essence and in his own self have ever been unseen, inaccessible, and unknowable. Now here this is from Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, but it's really in referring to what he says in the Egon when he says, what does it mean to say we enter the presence of God? Because this is talked about in the writings that we will enter the presence of God. So he's explaining here, so what does that mean if we would never obviously physically do so, nor is it said in the previous passage, will we ever know God directly? By presence, therefore, is meant the presence of the one who is his vice-regent or vicegerent. And I've been pronouncing this vicegerent, but a dear friend said, well, if you look it up online, it's supposed to be pronounced vicegerent. So I still like the way vicegerent sounds better, but it means the same thing. It means one who rules in the place of another amongst men. And so the presence of God is known through the presence of his manifestations. He moreover hath never had, nor hath he any peer or likeness. For were he to have any peer or likeness, he being God, how could it then be demonstrated that his being is exalted above and his essence sanctified from all comparison and likeness? Briefly, there hath been revealed in the Kitabi Egan concerning the presence and revelation of God, that which will suffice the fair-minded, meaning if you are a reasonable person, I've explained it sufficiently that it should satisfy you what is meant by entering the presence of God. And basically what he describes in the Egan is entering the presence means to attain nearness to the manifestations by reading their writings, following their guidance, and establishing a loving relationship with them. There was, what was the date on this? 1953. There was a book that came out that was very famous in 1953. Your God is Too Small. And it was very fine because it was saying, and of course, this is more than 50 years ago, more than a half century ago, so it's hardly anything new now, though it still would apply because it is written, as I recall, by J.B. Phillips to Protestant believers, primarily fundamentalists, though it would be to the Judaic believers as well. And that is the idea that God is this individual who physically, literally inserts himself into history and changes this, or who has punishment for various people, as in Sodom and Gomorrah, turning Lot's wife into a pillar of salt and so on. And what he's getting at is God is far beyond that. That is an anthropomorphic vision of God, God who literally creates, who really steps into history and so forth. And I'll read you just a description of the book. Your God is Too Small is a groundbreaking work of faith which challenges the constraints of traditional religion. In his discussion of God, author J.B. Phillips encourages Christians to redefine their understanding of a creator without labels or earthly constraints, and instead search for a meaningful concept of God. Phillips explains that the trouble facing many of us today is that we have not found a God big enough for our modern needs. And of course, it's wonderful the way that what we just read from the Baha'i writings responds to that. Of course, it's not God is not anthropomorphic. So I repeat the same thing with this title of this slide, which I think is explained in a prayer in Prayers and Meditations by Baha'u'llah. This is from the long obligatory prayer. And I'll say your manifestation is too small. If you think there's simply some sort of ambiensis that God tells them what to say and they say it, and that's the extent of what they do. They are but of course they are perfect mirrors reflecting perfectly the attributes of God. So we know they do that too. But they also have power to transform reality, something we're going to see either tonight or next time if we don't get to the slides tonight. So here is the passage that I love so much from the long obligatory prayer. I testify unto that whereunto have testified all created things, and the concourse on high, and the inmates of the all highest paradise, and beyond them the tongue of grandeur itself from the all glorious horizon, that thou art God, that there is no God but thee, and that he who hath been manifested is the hidden mystery, the treasured symbol through whom the letters B and E have been joined and knit together. That's very powerful, and this would be a fine bit of homework for you too for next time, and that is, what does that mean? Well, B, of course, is taken from it's different. It's translated differently in each language. It's B and E in English. It's the imperative God has but to say, or the manifestation, it says here, has but to say be, and it will happen. So here you see the power of the manifestation to bring things about. Maybe not instantly or instantaneously, though sometimes that happens too, such as the Bob saying, you can do whatever you want, but no one can stop me from finishing my instructions to my secretary. They take him out, they fire, and he's still there, or he's not there, and they find him back finishing his work. So that was an instantaneous expression of, I say this will be, therefore it will be. But notice it. So my point here is that the manifestation is the vehicle through which the creative power of God is expressed. The manifestation existed prior to the creation of heaven and earth. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's read this and see if we can get some sense of it. Take heed. Now, this is from the Kitab-i-Aqdas by Baha'u'llah. Take heed that ye dispute not idly concerning the Almighty and his cause. For lo, he hath appeared amongst you, invested with a revelation so great as to encompass all things, whether of the past or of the future. Were we to address our theme by speaking in the language of the inmates of the kingdom, we would say, in truth, God created that school ere he created heaven and earth, and we entered it before the letters B and E were joined and knit together. Such is the language of our servants in our kingdom. Consider what the tongue of the dwellers of our exalted dominion would utter. For we have taught them our knowledge, and we have revealed to them whatever had lain hidden in God's wisdom. Imagine then what the tongue of might and grandeur would utter in his all-glorious abode. Now, we could spend many evenings reflecting on this passage, but it would seem again to emphasize that the manifestation are the vehicles by which creation is brought into being. How, we do not know. And the school, of course, is speaking figuratively, meaning the learning of the manifestation occurs in the realm of the spirit. As we know, we've seen a passage already that says, and we'll see it again in this series of slides, that they are pre-existent, meaning unlike us, who began our reality when our soul emanates from the realm of the spirit and conjoins or associates with the body, the manifestations exist and are aware of their station before they are born into this world. And indeed, there's clear implications that they willingly choose that path of service. We'll get to that later. So here now, we come to the authoritative explanation of the passage that was your homework for last week. O king, I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the Almighty were wafted over me and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven, and for this there befell me what hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow. Now, two things here. You can't take this literally because there were no couches in the Sia Chow. And so you look up here and you see, oh, he was like a person upon a couch when this occurred. Now, but still, it's very mysterious. If he already pre-existed and was in the school of learning prior to being manifested in this world, what does he mean by this? Well, here is an authoritative explanation, and it's a beautiful explanation by Abdu'l-Baha from Some Answered Questions. This goes on for 3 slides, but they're well worth it. And we've been over them before, but it's so important that we understand that the manifestation, that our manifestation, our concept is too small. We need to expand our understanding of what this being is like, because it's beyond anything we currently grasp. We come to and this is from Some Answered Questions. This is Abdu'l-Baha speaking. We come to the explanation of the words of Baha'u'llah when he says, O king, I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes, and so forth. I'll skip to his explanation. This is the station of divine revelation. It is not a sensible, but an intelligible reality. It is sanctified from transcendent above past, present, and future. It is a comparison, an analogy, a metaphor, and not a literal truth. It is not the condition that is commonly understood by the human mind when it is said that someone was asleep and then awoke, but signifies a passage from one state to another. For example, and again, don't take that literally in meaning he's passing from a human state to the state of manifestation, because we're not finished yet. For example, sleeping is the state of repose, and wakefulness is the state of motion. Sleeping is the state of silence, and wakefulness is the state of utterance. Sleeping is the state of concealment, and wakefulness is that of manifestation. And we're going to see in slides later, probably won't get to them tonight, examples of the fact that Baha'u'llah is well aware of his revelation before the Sia Chow. And there are a couple of examples, particularly with Sunusi, that we're going to see, where he says, yes, you found me, but don't let anyone know. So we go on with this interpretation. We come to the explanation, excuse me, I'm sorry. I just did that. For example, in Persian and Arabic, it is said that the earth was asleep, spring came and it awoke, or that the earth was dead, spring came and it found life again. These expressions are comparisons, analogies, similes, and figurative interpretations in the realm of inner meaning. Now you see one of the reasons that we've been studying at the beginning of the outset of this second set of courses, the importance of understanding how symbols and similes and analogies work. So he finishes this authoritative explanation with, briefly, the manifestations of God have ever been and will ever be luminous reality, and no change or alteration ever takes place in their essence. At most, before their revelation, they are still and silent, like one who is asleep. And after their revelation, they are eloquent and effulgent, like one who is awake. So that's what it means. It has nothing to do with his suddenly become aware or God suddenly speaking to him. Shoghi Effendi calls this experience what we call the epiphany of the prophets, or at least what I call it sometimes, where the manifestation receives the signal to begin, if you will. He calls it the first intimation of their revelation. And that's something we'll discuss later. But basically, I look upon it, and this is my own understanding, is that they basically receive the signal to start revealing. Twin stations. This is another thing that is confusing to some. The station of essential unity and the station of distinction. These are two essential stations, are the twin stations each manifestation has. Again, this might, to some people, imply that the manifestations are human and then they become manifestations. So they transition from the station of distinction to the station of essential unity. Not what is meant. And this is discussed by Baha'u'llah at great length in the Kitab-i-Iqan. This does not mean they are sometimes manifesting God and in others are not. This indicates that they occupy both stations simultaneously. Now, that's my writing. That's not from the authoritative text. But this is, and let me take a sip of tea. Were any of the all-embracing manifestations of God to declare, I am God, he verily speaketh the truth, and no doubt attacheth thereto. For it hath been repeatedly demonstrated that through their revelation, their attributes and names, the revelation of God, his name and attributes, are made manifest in the world. And to put it another way, without their appearance, they would not be. The other is the station of distinction, and pertaineth to the world of creation and to the limitations thereof. In this respect, each manifestation of God hath a distinct individuality, a definitely prescribed mission. So they know, I presume, beforehand that what their part in this sequence of revelation is going to be. A predestined revelation, and specifically designated limitations. Now, it doesn't mean limitations that that they are limited, but the revelation, what they can accomplish at a given time in history, is limited. So even as each says, I wish I could tell you, there's more to tell you, but you cannot bear it now. That's what Christ said. And Baha'u'llah indicates how much more the next manifestation will reveal. Each one of them is known by a different name, is characterized by a special attribute, fulfills a definite mission, and is entrusted with a particular revelation. Even as he saith, and this is from the Quran, as you can see, Surah 2, verse 253. Some of the apostles we have caused to excel the others. To some God hath spoken, some he raised and exalted, and to Jesus, son of Mary, we gave, and the 177 is the page number, manifest signs, and we strengthened him with the Holy Spirit. This is one of the passages where Muhammad acknowledges the sequence of apostles. So progressive revelation, while explained in greater detail in the Baha'i faith, is also explained in the Quran. You'll notice the discussion of progressive revelation in the Iqan begins with Baha'u'llah discussing in some detail the Surah of Hud, which describes the sequence of manifestations and why they were rejected by the followers of the previous manifestation. Well, we'll do a couple of more slides and we'll have to quit for the evening and finish this discussion next time, because it's such a rich, is even the little we do here in this class, there's so much rich information we have to draw on, and we're so fortunate to have access to this. The cause of differences among manifestations. Now, this too is still Baha'u'llah speaking from the Igan. In other words, what causes the differences in religions? Well, it's obviously not their differences between the manifestations, because they all know exactly what part they have to play on the ongoing plan of God. It is because of this difference, and that is, he's talking about the station of distinction. It is because of this difference in their station and mission that the words and utterances flowing from these well springs of divine knowledge appear to diverge and differ. Otherwise, in the eyes of them that are initiated into the mysteries of divine wisdom, all their utterances are in reality but the expression of one truth. As most of the people have failed to appreciate those stations to which we have referred, they therefore feel perplexed and dismayed at the varying utterances pronounced by the manifestations that are essentially one and the same. And finally, we'll end with this one, the primal point. This term is usually in the Baha'i writings and in our discussions of the Baha'i writings associated with the Bab, because he is the primal point that instigates a new cycle in the history of humankind on this planet. He initiates the end of the Adamic cycle or the prophetic cycle and the beginning of the Baha'i cycle. Arise thou to serve the cause and say, I swear by the righteousness of God, verily this is the primal point, arrayed in his new attire and manifested in his glorious name. He at present beholdeth everything from this horizon. Indeed, he is supreme over all things. Amongst the concourse on high, he is known as the most great announcement, and in the realms of eternity is the ancient beauty, and before the throne by this name, which hath caused the footsteps of them that are endued with understanding to slip. Well, we'll stop there for this evening. Let me stop sharing. And we're right in the middle of a very powerful discussion, and a very so deep that even though it took Baha'u'llah only 2 days and 2 nights to write the Igan, we have this famous scholar Mirza Abul Fazl, having written in his copy of the Igan, am now reading for the 29th time. There is so much more to learn. And so if it took him 29 times, well, he wasn't even finished at 29, how much more must we have to find in that? And I think we all realize that as Baha'is, that every time you read a passage or read a particular complete tablet or complete work, it becomes a new work. And part of that is because you see things you haven't seen before. And another part of that I have found in my own experience is that each time we read, we ourselves have become changed, or are in different circumstances, have different needs, different desires, and perhaps are more enlightened. But we certainly have gone through more experiences and have different needs to fulfill. And that's another reason we see things on another reading and another reading that we never noticed before. It's an incredible thing. And of course, still another aspect in which that is true is that, as we've said before, the writings have so many different levels of meaning.